Welcome to A Cup of History, a podcast where we explore key events and figures from world history. I'm Chris, your host, and together with our experts Jesse and Emily, we'll make world history easy to understand and engaging for everyone. Looking for the perfect podcast for your drive? Tune into A Cup of History. We release new episodes 4 times a week on podcasts and twice a week on YouTube. Subscribe now and learn something new while you're on the go. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Cup of History. Today we're diving into one of the most chaotic yet fascinating days of the year, Black Friday. Jesse, Emily, thank you for being here.
Hey Chris, always a pleasure. Black Friday is such a wild topic to cover, especially since it's not just about the shopping frenzy we see today.
Absolutely. Most people think it's just the day after Thanksgiving where you get big discounts, but there's a long history behind it that many don't know.
I definitely didn't know there was much more to it. I thought it was just a shopping tradition that caught on.
That's what makes it so interesting, Chris. The term Black Friday actually started off with a very different meaning. The first major use of the term was linked to a financial crisis way back in 1869.
Wait, financial crisis? What happened?
Well, in 1869, 2 notorious financiers, Jay Gould and James Fisk, attempted to corner the U.S. gold market. They manipulated the price of gold for personal gain, causing a massive spike in the price. But their scheme unraveled when the U.S. government, under President Ulysses S. Grant, released gold into the market, causing prices to plummet and leading to financial ruin for many investors. It was a disaster for the economy, and that day became known as Black Friday.
Wow, so that Black Friday was about gold prices crashing? That's a pretty dark start.
Exactly. And for decades, the term Black Friday was used to describe negative events, like financial crises or chaotic days. It wasn't associated with shopping at all. The connection to retail didn't come until the 1950s.
So how did it go from a financial crash to being a shopping day?
Good question. The story of Black Friday as a shopping event actually begins in Philadelphia. In the 1950s, the day after Thanksgiving became notorious for causing traffic jams, crowds, and chaos in the city. Shoppers and tourists flocked to the city for the Army-Navy football game, which took place on the Saturday after Thanksgiving.
And with all these people coming into the city, it created absolute gridlock. The Philadelphia police weren't too happy about it. They had to work long hours managing the crowds, the traffic, and even an increase in shoplifting. The police started calling it Black Friday because of all the stress it caused them.
So the name wasn't a positive thing at all?
Not at all. It was about the chaos and strain it put on the police force. Stores were packed, streets were gridlocked, and it was just a nightmare for the city. In fact, businesses in Philadelphia tried to change the name to Big Friday to make it sound more pleasant, but it didn't catch on.
That's hilarious. I can't imagine people calling it Big Friday now.
Right, and even though the term stuck, it wasn't until the 1980s that Black Friday started to get a more positive spin in the retail world.
Exactly. Retailers across the U.S. started to adopt the name and tried to flip its meaning. They pushed the idea that Black Friday was the day when stores finally went into the black, meaning they turned a profit after being in the red for much of the year.
I've heard that explanation before. So it was a bit of rebranding?
Yep. The retailers didn't want to be associated with something negative, so they created this narrative that Black Friday was a day of profit, a turning point where they'd make up for losses from earlier in the year.
It worked, too. People started to see Black Friday as a shopping event, and over time, it became the busiest shopping day of the year. Retailers began offering huge discounts, and by the late 1980s, it was cemented as a national event.
That's such a clever twist. I had no idea it had such a dark history before it became a retail frenzy. But how did it get so global?
That's an interesting evolution. In the early 2000s, as online shopping grew, Black Friday began to spread internationally, for a state. Retailers in countries like Canada, the UK, and even parts of Asia started adopting the same kinds of sales events to compete with US-based online stores. It's become this global phenomenon, although it's not necessarily tied to Thanksgiving in those countries.
That makes sense. So it's less about the holiday and more about the sales now.
Exactly. In fact, in some places, they've even had to change the name to better fit local customs or avoid negative connotations. For example, in Egypt, it's called White Friday because Black Friday might be considered inappropriate for religious reasons.
So in our last episode, we talked about the origins of Black Friday, from a financial crash to a chaotic shopping day in Philadelphia. Today, we're looking at how Black Friday became the massive event it is today.
That's right, Chris. After the 1980s, Black Friday kept growing. Retailers started opening earlier and offering bigger discounts each year to outdo their competition.
Yeah, and it didn't stop there. By the early 2000s, stores were opening at 6 a.m., then 4 a.m., and by the late 2000s, some stores were opening their doors at midnight.
I remember that. I used to see news stories of people camping outside stores in the freezing cold just to be the first inside.
Exactly. It became almost a sport who could get the best deal on the most sought-after items. But with that came some unfortunate side effects. Do you remember hearing about some of the violence and injuries that happened?
Oh, definitely. People getting trampled when the doors opened, or even fights breaking out over the last TV on the shelf. It sounds like it got out of control.
It did. One of the worst incidents was in 2008, when a Walmart employee was trampled to death as shoppers pushed their way into the store in New York. It was a huge wake-up call for retailers to rethink how they manage these big crowds.
That's horrible. It's hard to believe something like shopping could lead to that kind of tragedy.
Yeah, and after that, retailers started making changes. They implemented crowd control measures, opened earlier to spread out the rush, and even began offering deals online to avoid the chaos altogether.
That's probably when online shopping really started to take off for Black Friday, right?
Exactly. By the early 2010s, we saw the rise of Cyber Monday, a term coined by retailers to keep the sales momentum going into the next week. It was a way to target people who preferred to shop online rather than brave the crowds.
It worked brilliantly. Cyber Monday quickly became a huge part of the shopping season. And now, with the rise of online giants like Amazon, more people are skipping the stores entirely and shopping from home.
Yeah, I can't even remember the last time I went to a store on Black Friday. It's all about those online deals now.
That's true for a lot of people. In fact, in recent years, more sales have happened online than in physical stores. Retailers have extended their deals to last for several days, with Cyber Week becoming just as important as Black Friday itself.
It's amazing how much it's changed in just a few decades. So do you think the future of Black Friday is all online?
It's possible. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw an even bigger shift toward online shopping. In 2020, foot traffic to stores dropped significantly, but online sales hit record highs.
Exactly. And even as we move past the pandemic, that trend seems to be sticking. Black Friday might not be the crowded, chaotic in-store event it once was, but it's definitely not going away anytime soon.
So what's the biggest takeaway from all of this? How should we look at Black Friday now?
I'd say Black Friday is a reflection of how consumer habits have evolved. It started as something local and chaotic, and now it's this global, multi-day shopping phenomenon that takes place both online and in stores.
And it shows how powerful retail marketing can be, turning what was once a day of stress and traffic jams into a celebration of shopping and deals. But we should always remember its roots.
Definitely. Thanks, Jesse and Emily, for such a great conversation. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot about this infamous shopping day. That's it for this episode of A Cup of History. See you next time. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, we release new episodes 4 times a week on podcasts and twice a week on YouTube. Subscribe now and keep learning something new, even on the go.